Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of The Bitter Pill. Today I want to talk a little bit about YouTube commentator Michael Brooks, who unfortunately passed away at a very young age of 36 recently from a sudden medical condition. Uh, First of all, my condolences to his family and friends. Sounds like he was loved by many people. He was smart and funny, and it seems like he was a caring person who was genuinely passionate about the struggle for social justice. Of course, in our culture, like many human culture, there's a tendency to put people on a pedestal and idealize them in death. We have a saying, don't speak ill of the dead. And sometimes that's done even if they're, frankly, horrible people, like, say, John McCain or Ronald Reagan. Given that horrid people are often revered by the U.S. political establishment and treated in an uncritical manner, a lot of times even by people we wouldn't expect that from, like, say, Bernie Sanders, who uh, praised John McCain up and down, even though he did a lot of terrible things. But I think we're allowed to criticize people's ideas and practice, even if they've passed away, and even if they've done a lot of good things. I don't think it serves the interests of social progress to send criticism down the memory hole just because someone has passed. So, for example, I loved the work of historian Howard Zinn, but I was and continue to be very critical of him or anyone else pushing lesser evilism as he did back when George Bush was running for president, promoting the idea that we should hold our nose and vote for the lesser evil Al Gore or what's his name, John Kerry, in order to prevent Bush from being president. And on one hand, it's not the job, certainly, of family members or friends to criticize a deceased person. I certainly didn't have anything negative to say about my dad when he passed away a while back, even though, of course, I could have, because nobody's perfect. So I think it's only appropriate that most people follow the dictum, don't speak ill of the dead, if it's somebody that they were close to. But if it's someone who had an impact on the world and we're not close to them personally, I'm more inclined to say, hey, wait a minute, let's not put them on a pedestal. Let's look at their life in a balanced way. So that's what I did back when Senator Paul Wellstone tragically passed away in a plane accident a few years ago. Virtually the entirety of the left was hero worshiping him when he passed. And so I wrote a letter to the Progressive magazine, which had been among those left-leaning media outlets that didn't have anything at all negative or critical to say of him when he passed. So in my letter, Paul was no saint. He did some good progressive things, but he also cast votes against gay marriage. He was a big backer of Israel. He supported some of the military budgets. There were things that he deserved to be criticized for, even though he was on the right side overall of most things. So I'm going to do that here with Michael Brooks, who definitely wasn't a person in a position of power like Paul Wellstone, but he had a large following on YouTube and was an influential political commentator. And he definitely did some good work. He presented political ideas in an appealing way. He made people laugh, and he explained things well. I remember a recent interview he did with Lula, the former president of Brazil, a few months ago, that I thought was really outstanding. He seemed to have a good handle on what was going on in Brazilian politics and the role that Lula had played there. But, like Howard Zinn, Michael Brooks promoted voting for the lesser of two evils in presidential elections, such as, for example, Hillary Clinton over Trump, to supposedly stop the bleeding. And there was a fairly rancorous YouTube feud about this between him and Jimmy Dore. Michael even implied in a video he did that such a voting pattern played a role in the build-up to the Russian Revolution, which that's just nonsense. No revolutionary socialist, either the Bolsheviks or anyone else who led a successful revolution, has ever advocated quote-unquote strategic voting for lesser evil quote-unquote capitalist politicians, to my knowledge. And Michael seemed like he misunderstood the role of principled rejection of voting for the likes of Clinton or Obama or Biden or Al Gore or whoever, basically characterizing it as a meaningless protest that had nothing to do with building a movement for social justice, in essence, an expression of political purity or moral purity or whatever. Well, if we could try, try telling that to the abolitionists in the mid 1800s. They'd have laughed you out of the room. They certainly didn't vote for lesser evil pro-slavery politicians like Henry Clay in the 1844 presidential election. They either didn't vote or they voted for the protest candidate, the anti-slavery candidate, James Burney. And likewise, throughout history, people who were among the leaders of movements for social justice carried the principles that they adhered to with them into the voting booth, and there are reasons for that. We can get into this in more detail in another episode, and I have written about it some. But I'll tell you, as a social psychologist and a political activist for nearly 40 years now, that there is enormous power, potentially, in taking a principled and consistent position, even if you're a tiny minority to begin with. So the tiny minority of less than 1% who voted for anti-slavery James Burney in the 1840 presidential election, or the tiny minority who voted for Jill Stein the last couple of presidential elections, for example. So in short, I think Michael was very wrong about that. Now, some of you who watch this channel may recall one of my first episodes where I took Michael, as well as Abby Martin, who he was interviewing for a show, to task for some ill-informed criticisms they made of presidential candidate Tulsi Gabbard, and also for what seemed to often be the flip side in the case of many progressive Tulsi Gabbard bashers, a completely uncritical attitude toward Bernie Sanders. They had nothing negative to say, or really nothing at all, actually, about Bernie's numerous shortcomings on foreign policy, or his sheepdogging for the Democratic establishment, and just general lack of a spine. I haven't had a chance to research it yet, but I wonder whether Abby or Michael had any second thoughts in light of Sanders' early and complete capitulation to Biden, his utter failure to ever speak out about his good friend, quote-unquote, Joe Biden's predatory attitude toward women and conduct, or his capitulation to the Wall Street-friendly COVID bailout bill back in April that gave trillions of dollars to the very people who have thrown us into economic crises and otherwise screwed us over for their own benefit. I certainly didn't hear anything about that from them with regard to Bernie Sanders, who, as you might guess, whenever he passes away, I'm going to take a similar stance and be like, hey, wait a minute, Bernie was no saint. Let's not put him on a pedestal. Let's take an objective look at the impacts that he had on the world. So, in conclusion, although yes, let's be compassionate toward those who are close to someone who's passed away, and be genuinely sorry for their loss when they have some good qualities and contributions. And certainly let's recognize the good qualities and deeds of Michael, Brooks, or others who have left us. But let's not put anyone on a pedestal. We're all human. To paraphrase one of my favorite social psychologists, the legendary Phil Zimbardo, who did the Stanford Prison Study, and more recently has done work on heroism, basically, there are people who perform heroic deeds, but there's not necessarily any such thing as a heroic personality. They're only human beings, not heroes, as a character trait. So, while honoring the memory of those who have passed, let's, if we're not like part of their family or something of that sort, stick to a rational, balanced, and truthful assessment of their humanity and their contribution to humanity. So that's all for this episode of The Bitter Pill. Please like and share and subscribe to the channel. Let me know what you think in the comments section. And if you're so inclined, give me some love on Patreon. See you next time, everybody.